Well, as I wrote this book for Bantam and trying to study the relationship of drugs to culture over thousands of years in many places. And what I came to feel was that in a cultural situation where you have a strong plant hallucinogen, one of these pipeline to the goddess plants, women will tend to be in the powerful positions in the society because I'm convinced that women were the developers of language, that the gathering part of the hunting-gathering equation, which was the women's part, had more evolutionary pressure on it to develop syntax in order to differentiate these hundreds and hundreds of plants, some toxic, some food. And I think that when the primal partnership society on the Saharan grasslands of Africa began to break up, it happened very slowly, you see. At the climax of the African cattle goddess mushroom partnership equilibrium, my supposition is that probably mushrooms were being taken every 2 weeks or month in a group situation with group sexual practices because of the CNS arousal component of the psilocybin being what was going on. Well, okay, so this is the experience that these people were building their civilization around, and it was an experience of boundary dissolution, tribal-mindedness, group sensuality, and group values. Well, as the African continent dried up and this pastoral lifestyle became more and more difficult to support, and the distance between water holes over centuries, we're talking now, grew greater, it became harder and harder to hold these mushroom ceremonies on time, to have this experience regularly, to keep it part of the society, and eventually it died out. And there was also another factor working here, which was as the climate dried, it became more and more important to find a way to preserve the mushrooms so that they could be used then at the regular ceremonies. Well, the preferred agent for preservation, I discovered in the Neolithic, was honey. Well, the only problem with that is that honey itself is a natural product subject to fermentation. So as the mushrooms got scarcer and the climate drier, and there were more and more preserved mushrooms in honey, and then fewer and fewer preserved mushrooms in more and more honey, you got a slow switch over to a mead cult, an alcohol cult. And at that very early period in the Middle East, then you get the emergence of the dominator model. At 9,500 BC, from Scandinavia to Arabia, you get what's called the Tanged Point Techno-Complex. Means suddenly a lot of chipped flint, not distributed along river bottoms where game was frequent, but distributed on the wrong side of walls around former habitation sites. In other words, war has come to the world of 9,500 BC. This is because great agriculture over-succeeded. Surpluses meant sedentary lifestyles and defense of inventories. And suddenly there were people who had food and people who didn't have food, and a whole economy of pillage and strife emerged. So I'm really very unenamored of monotheism in all of its forms. I understand its philosophical attraction. One, it's the attraction of simplicity. Let there be one God. After all, isn't that the simplest solution? But taking a Jungian tack on that, we image in our personalities the kinds of gods that we permit ourselves to worship. And if you have an image of God as omnipotent, omnipresent, infallible, all-seeing, this is the dominator archetype incarnate. And then everyone images it in their psyche, and you get the birth of the ego. this thing. It's like a tumor that forms in the personality in the absence of psilocybin. In the absence of psilocybin, these assumptions begin to get going about my territory, my women, my food, and there's no end to it. It's the death of everything. So this long strain of dominator culture that comes out of the Middle East gets unfortunately reinforced, whether serendipitously or by design is not clear, by the choice of a phonetic alphabet to put down these early Middle Eastern languages. You see, phonetic alphabet gives tremendous permission for abstraction, because what is symbolized is not a little picture, not the thing, but the sound of the name of the thing. So you're 3 steps removed. It isn't enough that you communicate in symbols. Here you don't communicate in symbols. You communicate in a still 1 stage further removed thing. So, cultural styles are, I believe, drug-based, based on very old relationships with intoxicants. And it basically divides along 2 lines. The soporific, these things which loosen social strictures and give permission to express the dominator model, and then these other more nebulous, visionary kinds of things. So it's a suppression versus enhancement thing. This might be a good point to make the point, since there's so much talk about drugs in today's world, that the pro-psychedelic position is an anti-drug position. That should be clear, because the way I think of drugs and what is objectionable about them is by analyzing cause and effect. Well, what is it that we don't like about drugs? Well, we don't like that they cause unexamined, repetitive, self-destructive behavior. In other words, they make you stupid and self-destructive and habitual on those items. Well, this is precisely the kind of behavior patterning that psychedelics break up and destroy. You cannot carry out unexamined, self-destructive, habitual behavior in the presence of psychedelics, because they will show you too strong an image of the consequences. These amazing statistics that were reported with curing alcoholism with LSD before they made LSD illegal, where they would give chronic alcoholics 1 500 gamma LSD trip with a sitter, and something like 60% of these people were going dry and sticking with it. Well, people said, my God, LSD is a cure for alcoholism. No, it's a cure for stupidity. It's not a cure for alcoholism. That's infantile. It merely gives you an image of the consequences of your behavior. And this image is so horrifying that you modify your behavior forthwith. Yes.
The relationship of the psychedelic experience and the art process. In that when I choose to have a psychedelic experience, I make a conscious choice to take ayahuasca or LSD or whatever, and choose and control the time and place and the company I'm in. But when it comes over me in an uncontrollable way, when I get an idea for a form or a painting or something like that, it's not something that I can control. And it's a similar process in that you go into a different experiential mode. And I found that we can sit here and talk about this and we laugh about elves and things, but in the real world, people don't like it. It's like Main Street, where you were talking about Main Street. If this happens to me and I feel like I really need to do my work, because the muse is there. I can't say, well, the muse is here, I have to go paint. Somebody else empty the garbage. People get angry at me and say, that's irresponsible. There's no place for an artist or a seer unless you've got, say you're Terence Mckenna, so therefore it's okay for you to come off the wall because you're going to be funny and entertaining, but it's not okay for just, any old person like me to do that.
You're about to get what you came for. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
You lose your job.
Well, then you can do what I do. The reason I do this is because I lost my job. And, no, I mean, I see what you're saying. I mean, it is problematic. If one person believes it, it's a psychosis. If two people, it's a folie à deux. 3, a cult. 4, a movement, and so on. What we're trying to do here is empower the meme, give permission, and say, you just got comfortable with gays and black people. Well, guess what? You're now going to have to elbow over one step further because there are all us lodies out here. And we're tired of being thought of as stupid. We're not stupid. In fact, we're smarter than you are. And, we're tired of being this is not the Cheech and Chong hour. So, and the deeper answer to your question about art is I think that these two things are basically spun together and are completely one and the same process. I mean, on a historical scale, the way I think of these psychedelics as they're catalysts for ideas. They are actually like enzymes. An enzyme, let me define a catalyst first. A catalyst is a chemical which makes a reaction go faster, but it isn't itself consumed in the reaction. And an enzyme is an organic catalyst. Okay, so psilocybin, these things, they're like organic enzymes for creativity, for the imagination. We have this peculiar faculty called the imagination. It's like a wonderful, omni-adaptable hand. It's an internalized hand. We use the imagination to grasp situations and to remake models of reality. And this is what's given us the one-up on the tapir, the cheetah, the gorilla, is, the imagination. Now, artists have always been, the carriers of the banner of the imagination. But it becomes much more cogent and pregnant with importance in the modern context because the whole cultural enterprise is becoming designed. I mean, I don't have to tell this to people from L.A. L.A. is one of the most heavily designed cities in the world. The entire cultural fabric, the coral reef of human accretions, is becoming an expression of art. And I think this is, we might as well talk about this now, or at least brush by it. This is where our future lies, in the realm of the imagination, somehow. I mean, I can't quite put all the pieces together for you this afternoon, but some afternoon I will. It's just not, I don't know what to say yet. It's too early. But downstream, and the technology is already taking shape, we are going to go into the imagination. We are going to live in a world that touches the earth no more lightly, no more heavily than a thought. And this is a reasonable cultural goal. Money can be made doing this. This is not sky blue stuff. We can retool the culture toward this revivifying of archaic sensation and make money at it and back off a little from this other thing, which is so tremendously destructive. And it basically has to do with turning it over to artists. People ask, what can I do? What can little me do in this onrushing planetary chaostrophe that has seized everyone? Well, I think the answer is cognitive activity. Dance, poetry, painting, writing, computer graphics, code writing, whatever your gig is. But cognitive activity is our salvation. It always has been, and it must be now. There's no going back.